Well, it seems like what was exposed just by watching the video that you took is just, it's so undeniable.
It's utterly undeniable. The truth is right there. All they have to do is want to see it.
It seems so bizarre that it takes a person like you to write a book and to go over there and risk your life, and then to come on a podcast and discuss it, and to write a book and distribute that book, that this isn't something that's on every major news channel, every newspaper, on the front page every day. Like, look what we're doing. Like, look at the harm we're causing. Look at what we're worried. There's so many things that we're worried about in this country that could be considered trivial in comparison.
Who buys the ads on a lot of those major news channels?
Yeah.
Okay, and I say that not just glibly, because after I came back from one of my trips, I've written a few op-eds along the way, just talking about what I've seen. And after my last trip, I wasn't able to go in 2020 because of the pandemic. I got back in 2021, and I was able to see the impact of the pandemic on the people down there, by the way, which is another important thing we should mention. But I was writing up an op-ed, and the point of it was that, we relied more than ever on our rechargeable devices during lockdowns and so on in order to continue our jobs and education, right? I mean, a lot of people did online school, especially in the first part of the pandemic during the lockdowns, work from home, all of that, right? So demand for rechargeable gadgets increased, which meant demand for cobalt increased. And I was curious, well, what happened down there at the other end of the chain? And when I finally got back down there, what I saw was a lot of the big mining companies also shuttered for weeks and months, especially in the beginning when people didn't know what was going on. But it's not like demand for cobalt stopped. It actually went up because everyone was buying more stuff to do work from home and school from home. So there was massive pressure pushing the peasant population into the trenches and pits to keep the cobalt flowing. And they got sick and they got unwell, and their income certainly didn't improve. Kids were pulled out of school, the ones that were in school, to keep the cobalt flowing. And I wrote a little op-ed about it, and I had the hardest time placing it in mainstream media.
How so?
What was told to me by a couple of journalist colleagues off the record was, you're coming at companies that buy too much advertising.
Jesus.
And that's another part of this whole thing, right? That when you mention, well, why isn't it plastered all over mainstream media? Now, to be fair, there's been some journalism on it, some newspaper articles, some stories, and some mainstream media has been down there to do the odd story, but they only go to a point. They don't pierce to the truth. And that's something I had to contend with that I didn't think I would. And I had to sort of, in the end, kind of tweak and dial back my op-ed, and I got it placed up on CNN website last December after that last trip I took. But it should be everywhere. We should be talking about it. The same way years ago everyone was talking about sweatshops and Nike, and that got a lot of attention, and then Blood Diamonds, and we all talked about that, and we talk about it when it punches through, and gets to enough people, and gets coverage, and so that day will come for cobalt. It's coming soon. I'm going to keep pushing until it comes. And then I'm going to stand back and let people deal with this and solve these problems, people meaning these companies. And if they want help, I'm here.
It's also this undeniable feeling that history will not be kind to this era when we look back at this, and about how people have conveniently ignored this or willfully tried to not just ignore the truth, but cover it.
Yeah, that's something. It's just it's the tragedy on top of the tragedy that it didn't have to be this way. And it doesn't have to be this way. It just takes accepting responsibility. And I know we've talked about why that may be problematic and lead to some blowback and whatnot. But you know what? One day, It's going to happen. It will have to happen. People are going to demand that it happens once they learn the truth. The very first abolitionists, back in the late 1700s, they lived in a time where slavery was okay. Everybody had slaves. It's the way things were. And there were a handful of people who came together. They were in London, 1787, and they said, no, this is not okay. And they operated on a belief that if the average person is good in their heart, and if they know the truth, they'll do something about it. And there were some in the group that were more cynical, no, what are you talking about? People are self-interested. They don't want things disrupted. And power definitely doesn't want things disrupted. And there was this ideological tussle. But in the end, they were right. They brought the truth out. People cared. Enough people cared. And things had to change. And they did change, at least on paper. Now, the legacies of how slavery has persisted and so on, that's another conversation. But the first movement succeeded because of this idea, bring the truth. That first Congo horror, same thing. The first human rights movement of the 20th century was shine light into the heart of darkness in the Congo. And there were people who went down there, and they gathered testimonies, and they gathered data, and they brought it to the world. And power said, no, it's a fiction. Don't believe what they're saying. This is nonsense. Everything's fine down there. We're saving these people. They're working well, and they're happy. And they kept coming at it with truth, and then finally things changed. Leopold's regime was brought down in that case. And the same thing will happen today. It's just a question of when. And when enough people hear about it, and especially because it touches their lives, right? Every single day, you can't send a tweet, you can't check your email, you can't check Instagram, you can't do social media, you can't function. I mean, 99.9% of the people who are probably going to listen to us have this conversation will do so on a gadget that has cobalt in the battery. So it touches all of our lives. And when enough people know that truth, they're going to say, no, not tolerable. And then these companies are going to have to account for all of it. So they might as well get started. I wish they would, but it will be forced upon them, I think, by the good people of this world eventually.
And the other option, which is even more horrific, is that nothing changes.
I suppose there's always the possibility